In August of 1995, the Caribbean Sea glittered with promise for thousands of vacationers. For two people, this trip was supposed to be the first chapter of the rest of their lives. Newlyweds, Charles and Evelyn Morrison, fresh from their wedding in Tennessee, boarded the majestic Times MS Caribbean Dream Times cruise ship, their faces bright, with the kind of hope only new love can inspire. It was the perfect honeymoon, the perfect start to a perfect marriage. But just 3 days into their journey, that perfect illusion would be shattered. In the dead of night, somewhere in the vast, dark waters between Florida and the Cayman Islands, Charles and Evelyn Morrison would vanish from their locked cabin. There were no witnesses. There was no sign of a struggle. All their belongings, from wallets and passports to a silver bracelet on Evelyn's nightstand, were left untouched. They were simply gone. For nearly 2 decades, their disappearance would become one of the most baffling mysteries at sea. A ghost story, whispered in the halls of cruise ships. This is the story of what happened on that ship, and the unbelievable one. 7-year journey to find a truth the ocean itself tried to bury forever. Charles and Evelyn Morrison, both 31 years old, were the kind of couple everyone rooted for. He was a thoughtful civil engineer. She was a beloved teacher, known for her warmth and easy smile. They had been married for just 5 days, a beautiful ceremony, with their closest friends and family watching. The 10-day cruise through the Caribbean was a generous gift from Charles's older sister, a chance for them to decompress and celebrate before settling into their new life. On the 12th of August, 1995, they boarded the Times Caribbean Dream Times in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. For a couple from Tennessee who had never been on a cruise, the ship was a floating city of wonders, a world of lido decks, glittering casinos, and endless ocean views. Friends who were on the same cruise later recalled their excitement. The first few days were a blur of honeymoon bliss. They attended welcome parties, they took photos, and Evelyn was often seen scribbling in a personal journal, documenting every happy moment. They were just 2 people, deeply in love at the very beginning of their forever. They had no idea it was already coming to an end. The evening of August 15th began like any other on the ship. Charles and Evelyn spent the afternoon relaxing. They had a dinner reservation for 7:30 p.m. in the formal Compass Rose dining room, but they never showed up. Assuming the newlyweds were simply caught up in their honeymoon and had opted for room service, their friends didn't worry. But when the next morning arrived with no word, a quiet concern began to grow. Ship security was alerted. They knocked on the door of cabin 318A. No answer. Using a master key, they stepped inside and found a chilling scene. The room was pristine, almost untouched. The bed was made. Evelyn's silver wedding bracelet was on the nightstand. Charles's wallet and both their passports were in a drawer. Every single one of their personal belongings was accounted for, but the people they belonged to were gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken furniture, no evidence of foul play, no indication of any disturbance. The room was exactly as you'd expect to find it if the occupants had just stepped out for a moment. But they hadn't. It was as if the couple had simply evaporated from inside a locked room in the middle of a ship, surrounded by thousands of people. The ship's crew launched a frantic ship-wide search. Every deck, every lounge, every public space was scoured. An announcement was made over the intercom, but no one came forward. Charles and Evelyn Morrison were nowhere to be found. The ship's captain, faced with an impossible situation, made the call. The remaining stops on the itinerary were cancelled, and the Times Caribbean Dream Times turned back towards the United States. When it docked, FBI agents were waiting. Cabin 318A was sealed off and treated as a crime scene, but forensic analysis yielded nothing. Fingerprints belonged only to Charles, Evelyn, and their cabin steward. The investigation immediately hit one dead end after another. There were no witnesses who saw them after dinner. No one reported hearing anything unusual. And most critically, the surveillance system on the ship in 1995 was hopelessly outdated. Cameras covered the main entrances, the bridge, and the casino, but the passenger hallways, including all of Deck 3, were complete blind spots. How could two adults disappear from a contained environment without a single person seeing anything? The railings were high, designed to prevent accidental falls. The idea that both could fall overboard at the same time, without anyone noticing, seemed statistically impossible. Suicide was ruled out. They had every reason to live. That left only the darkest possibility: foul play. But with no bodies, no evidence, and no witnesses, the FBI had nothing to go on. The case was a perfect, unsolvable mystery. For the families of Charles and Evelyn Morrison, the years that followed were a special kind of hell. They were left in a state of agonizing limbo, unable to mourn, yet unable to hope. The story of the vanished honeymooners became a dark legend in the cruise industry, a cautionary tale that faded with time. The Times Caribbean Dreamtimes was eventually sold and renamed, its decks and cabins renovated, erasing the last physical traces of the mystery. Cabin 318A was renumbered, its short, grim history wiped clean for new, unsuspecting passengers. The FBI case file grew thicker with reports, but no closer to an answer. It was officially declared a cold case. Years turned into a decade, then a decade and a half. Charles's sister, who had gifted them the cruise, and Evelyn's parents grew older, their questions hanging in the air, unanswered. It seemed the ocean had swallowed Charles and Evelyn whole, taking the truth of what happened on the 15th of August 1995 with them. For 17 long years, the story ended there, in silence. The sea doesn't give up its dead, and it certainly doesn't give up its secrets, or so everyone thought. In April of 2012, a powerful tropical storm churned up the coastline of Honduras. In a remote fishing village, a local man walking the beach after the storm made an incredible discovery. Half buried in the wet sand was a waterlogged, weathered duffel bag. Curious, he pulled it free. The contents were like a time capsule. Inside, miraculously preserved in a plastic envelope, were 2 American passports. The names on them were Charles and Evelyn Morrison, and they were flagged in an international database as missing since 1995. The bag was turned over to the U.S. Embassy, and from there, to the FBI. After 17 years of absolute silence, they finally had their first real piece of evidence. But it was what Times else Times was in the bag that would blow the case wide open. First, there was Evelyn's journal. While much of it was damaged, one entry from August 13th, 2 days before they vanished, was chillingly legible. She wrote about a friendly crew member, a man named Salazar, who had offered them a private tour of a restricted area of the ship. The second item was even more stunning: a disposable camera. Using incredible forensic techniques, the FBI's lab managed to develop the film that had been soaking in salt water for nearly 2 decades. The final photos on the roll were grainy and dark, but they were unmistakable. They showed Charles and Evelyn smiling uneasily in a narrow, industrial-looking hallway, a restricted crew area. The man they were with, a crew member in uniform, was Ricardo Salazar. Evelyn had documented their own path to danger. With these 2 pieces of evidence, the journal and the photos, the entire case was transformed. This was no longer just a mysterious disappearance. This was a homicide investigation with its first ever suspect. The FBI reopened the case and began a worldwide search for a man who had left the cruise industry shortly after 1995. They eventually found Ricardo Salazar living abroad. When confronted by investigators in September of 2012, with evidence he couldn't deny, Salazar confessed. His story finally unspooled the horrific truth of what happened that night. It wasn't about robbery. The valuables left in the cabin made that clear. Salazar and an accomplice, another crew member named Ibarra, had lured the friendly and trusting couple to a restricted maintenance corridor, promising to show them a unique part of the ship. While the exact motive was never fully clarified in public reports, investigators believe the situation turned violent When Charles fought back, he was killed. To eliminate the only witness, they killed Evelyn too. In a panic, the two men disposed of the bodies overboard from a restricted area, and they were gone in seconds, erased by the sea. They threw the duffel bag in after them, never imagining it would one day wash ashore and tell their story. Following Salazar's confession, his accomplice was tracked down in 2013 and extradited to face justice. After 17 years of agonizing silence, the case of the vanished honeymooners was finally solved. It was a conclusion that brought some measure of peace to the families, but also immense pain. Their loved ones weren't lost in some tragic accident. They had been murdered, their lives stolen by a senseless act of violence. The bodies of Charles and Evelyn Morrison were never recovered. The Caribbean Sea, the witness to their final moments, has held on to them, but it didn't hold on to the whole secret. In the end, through a random act of nature, a storm on a distant shore, the ocean gave back the one thing that could bring their killers to justice. It just goes to show, even when a mystery seems lost to time and buried under years of silence, the truth has a strange and powerful way of, eventually, surfacing. The story of Charles and Evelyn Morrison is a chilling reminder of how vulnerable we can be, even in places that feel completely safe. What are your thoughts on this incredible case? Do you believe justice was fully served? Let us know in the comments below. And for more deep dives into mysteries once thought to be unsolvable, be sure to subscribe.